Welcome, everybody, to 2025. I am so excited to have you join the show in the new year. This is the first episode of the Hopeful Majority in 2025. I took the last week off, like I know many of you did. I hope you spent some lovely time with loved ones, with family. I hope you took some time off to relax during the holidays. And now we're back. And I lifted my eyes above the horizon through the covers because I was totally hibernating over the last week, getting rested. And man, the news flood is just crazy. We've got the H-1B visa controversy happening within the MAGA movement. We've got the upcoming inauguration of President Trump. We've got New Year's to ring in. There's so much stuff happening. And you're probably wondering, well, how are we going to start off the Hopeful Majority in 2025, Manu? Well, I want to start it off by figuring out and giving you my number one tip on how to kick off 2025. How do we engage this year, especially given all the news that's already happening and we haven't even started the year? How do we kick off 2025? Here's my number one recommendation. Let's get into the show, and I'll catch you at the end. What is my number one recommendation to start off 2025? Because we just started the show. I welcomed you in. I appreciate you listening. And we just listed all the different things happening. We got the visa controversy. We've got the inauguration coming up. We've even had a tragic terror attack in New Orleans, I hear, on New Year's Eve. We've got a lot of things happening. We've got former President Jimmy Carter passing away. And this is like, day 4 into the new year. So what is my tip for how to start the new year? You're probably going to resist this tip because I know a lot of the people that listen to the show, I know the many people that have joined the Hopeful Majority over the last year, we are pretty plugged in. We're pretty engaged. We're pretty informed. We might be relatively constructive in how we engage in our politics. I know we want to listen. We want to be open-minded, but we're all plugged into the news. So this might confuse people a little bit. My number one tip for 2025 is to take a news detox for 1 week. Don't check the news for a week. And you're like, that sounds insane. I got to stay plugged in, dude. I got to make sure that I'm listening to everything. How do I not know what's going on in the world? 2025 is starting off. Don't we want to see what the stocks are? What's going on in foreign countries? What's happening with President Trump's inauguration? Manu, come on. So here's why. I took the last week and I've been completely off of social media. I've been not checking the news. I missed the H-1B visa controversy. Surprise, by the way, and this gets to a hint as to why we should do this. Nothing changed in that controversy because I didn't read the news. That controversy continued. The debate ensued on X. And I came back today to record the show for you all, for the appreciated Hopeful Majority, right? And I feel refreshed. I feel like I have an understanding of getting out of this 24/7 crazy news cycle and taking a moment to reflect, to think, what do I actually believe? What do I care about? What matters to me in the world? I mean, we live in this constant news cycle that is generated on outrage, that is built to create clicks, that is meant to keep us focused and lasered in on our phones. And throughout that process, we actually lose sight of the fact of what we understand, what we think, what we believe. I feel like there's sensory overload, there's information overload, and here we are stuck in an odd paradox where actually the flow of information is causing us to become more and more apathetic. We're hit with all this information, not knowing what to think, not knowing what to do, and then I think a lot of people just feel overwhelmed and they say, screw the process, quit it. In fact, I think by taking a week off, by chilling out a little bit, by not being plugged into the news, not only does the world not, continue on its process, but I think we actually take the moment to refresh, to re-energize, to re-understand. So there are 3 reasons why I think we should do this as we go into the new year. Reason number one is that I think it allows us to gain long-term perspective. When we live day to day in our social media enriched environment, when we live in this moment where everything is coming to us, every news article is engaged with us, we're constantly commenting, we're seeing what other people think, I think we lose perspective about our country, about our democracy. I think we forget to actually live in a 10-year time frame, a 15-year time frame, a 5-year time frame, and instead we live in an hourly time frame. I think part of the reason why polarization's increased over the years, part of the reason why we're seeing in studies why apathy is growing, why people feel less and less powerful in our democracy, why people feel, I think, that they're just sort of subjects to all of this information that is coming their way, is that I think we've forgotten that the momentary impact of our democracy, everything that happens, we lose track of the long term. And when we don't have perspective, I think we lose hope. One of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes is that I always remind myself that America is about to be 250 years old in 2026. Now, you might think that's a very long time. And yet, when you think about the context of empires and civilizations, Rome, 1800 years, the ancient Chinese Empire, 1400 years, Athenian democracy lasts for 400 years, and now US is entering 250. The United States is not at the end of its experiment. It's maybe in chapter 1 or 2. We've talked about this in episode, I think, 2 or 3 of the Hopeful Majority. Why do we talk about that? Because I think when we have the perspective of a longer time, I think we can start to peak ourselves above the fray and start thinking about the long term, start thinking about strategy. I think this is hidden stuff and hidden tips that a lot of the smartest people in the world do, because it allows us to get above the fray and actually control and start thinking about the long term. And importantly, I think it allows us to take a moment to breathe and think about, what do we actually believe? What do we care about? I know that news and information is important to consume, but let's actually take a moment to think about, well, what do I want in the world? I think it's tiring and exhausting to let other people think for us when we should start thinking for ourselves, because that's how I think we start to break the polarization that exists in our country. So taking a week off the news, taking a week off the day-to-day 24/7 cycle, I think allows us to live in a year-long cycle, in a 2-year-long cycle. Um, I can only imagine and account for the fact that I remember in 2017, which was my first year in college, President Trump had just been elected. Now you fast forward 10 years to 2024, right? People write about the history of our civilization, our society, in these timeframes of 10 years and 5 years. And yet when we're in the middle of these 10-year, 5-year timeframes, every day feels like it's existential. And how much longer can we continue if every day feels like it's the biggest thing that's happening in the world, whether you're a conservative or a liberal? I think we can all benefit from taking a break. Reason number two. Reason number two for why I think we should take a 1-week detox off the news is that the outrage industrial complex wants us to be plugged in 24/7. What is the outrage industrial complex? I know there's a lot of people that have been taking time off break and now are coming back. You're regular listeners of the show. And I also know that there's a lot of new people joining every episode. The outrage industrial complex we talk about throughout 2024 is this idea that we've built an economy off of outrage, where outrage creates profit and nuance does not. Having a nuanced take on an issue gets us nowhere. But if you want to increase your followers, you want to get more votes, you want to get more influence, you got to say the craziest stuff, the hottest takes, the news article headline that catches the most clicks. Here's the thing, that outrage economy that the hopeful majority is built on trying to reverse, right? That outrage economy depends on our ability to constantly stay plugged in. I think we forget that when we are always inundated with content, with news, when with constant uh, the fire hose of information, as some people call it, as you've left in the comments before, what that does is it causes us to be mere tools in that system of just constant news consumption, right? The outrage industrial complex feeds off of our crazy short attention spans. And remember, in reason one, we've got to have perspective. We've got to be able to think in the long term. And if we aren't able to think in the long term, we stay plugged in. And you know who wins when we get crazily anxious about the immediate moment that's happening in front of us? Not us. It's the media companies, it's the news websites, it's the social media companies, because they know that if they keep us hooked, then they've got everything. And yes, it's important to stay informed, but there's a difference between staying informed and getting lost in the flood of information. And that's the key. We cannot be lost in the flood of information. Point number 3. Why should we do a detox of news for 1 week? Get off the news for a week. It's because I think it'll allow us to start to challenge the cycle of polarization that we exist in. We live at a moment in time where we've so polarized and tribalized into our individual tribes, into the left, to the right, into different groups, and we only think the way that everyone else in that group thinks. And there's things like cancel culture that cause you to stay informed and enforced into your specific group, right? But I think if we want to actually start to challenge polarization, we want more nuance out there. If we want to be able to meet people that we disagree with respect, with goodwill, if we want to be able to understand people that are different than us, we got to start being able to consume different news information, news sources. We got to go to places that normally don't come to us, because remember, the engagement algorithm is built for you to be in an echo chamber, so you constantly keep reading the stuff that you want to read, and it's a doom loop and it's a doom cycle that keeps you stuck in the fray. By taking a week off, by resting and rejuvenating, by staying off the news, stay off the news for a week, what happens is we can now start to rise above the fray and start to think about, well, what is information that you might not be getting? what is the information that you might want to read more of? Are there other sources that I should be checking out? If I'm, let's say, on the center left side of the spectrum and I really consume the Atlantic, maybe I should look at something like the National Review, a magazine on the right. If I'm somebody that's on the right and let's say all I do is consume the Daily Wire, right? Maybe I should take time to listen to something like Pod Save America, right? Or maybe I should check out something like Valuetainment by Patrick Bet-David. So I think what happens is when you take that detox, it allows you to think about, well, what are the things that I am missing in my coverage of information? Because if you stay in that 24/7 doom loop, which I think the outrage industrial complex has convinced us that we've got to stay involved in every news that's happening, when in fact the reality is that if we can actually take time off, we can develop our own opinions. I think we become independent thinkers and we become better active participants in our democracy. Right. So importantly, if we can rise above that fray, we can start to break our own echo chambers. We can create the capacity for us to be more nuanced in our thinking. And so here's where I'll end with. A lot of people hear, let's detox off the news for a week as a New Year recommendation. They think, oh, what Manu's saying is be apathetic, be disengaged, or don't listen to the news. The news is not important. In fact, I'm saying quite the opposite. I think for us to be better actors, better participants in our democracy, for us to be more engaged, more effectively and constructively engaged, for us to be able to listen to people that are different than us with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, to be able to meet disagreements with hopeful optimism and some productive ways of thinking. I think we have to remember that we can actually be more effective citizens by getting out of the 24/7 doom loop of the news to gain some perspective, to not give the outrage industrial complex what it wants. By being able to unplug for the news for a little bit, I think we're able to develop what we want to believe, what we want to think. It allows us to not be passive consumers, but active consumers of information. And I think once we can start to take time off the news a little bit, we can start to navigate the information ecosystem in a little bit of a more productive way. Ultimately, it's about getting above the fray. It's about taking a moment to rest. It's about taking a moment to think about what we believe. And importantly, it's important to not just be a tool of the system that is built on outrage. I appreciate you. That's my number one net recommendation for the new year. I appreciate everybody listening, for everybody to be engaged. And more importantly, we're going to have fascinating conversations over the next couple of weeks of the Hopeful Majority with students across the country, college students that are hosting really productive conversations on their college campuses, because I know that's something that we've talked a lot about. Until then, I'll see you next week, my friends. Thank you for being members of the Hopeful Majority. Every Monday, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content, we're building this thing because remember, the world needs more nuance, less outrage. The world needs more productive bridge building and less shutting people out. I'll see you next week.